Hey up. I left the UK in the 1990s and I fetched up in Mexico for several years. During my time in Mexico, I didn't see any points of contact between the Britain that I'd left and the Mexico where I lived. Britain was a first world developed country, and well, Mexico wasn't. Things worked in Britain and they didn't in Mexico. Now that I'm back in the UK and have been for many years, I'm noticing more and more points of contact between the Britain that I now inhabit and the Mexico that I used to live in. In effect, what I'm saying is that Britain is becoming more and more third world in the way that it operates. Now, let me give you a couple of examples. The first one is to do with distribution. In Mexico, if you saw something that you liked in the shop, you bought it immediately because you were never sure that it would be resupplied. In Britain, distribution just isn't working anymore. So a similar attitude is happening. I buy things that I don't need to keep in because I know that I will use them, and I can't be sure that when I go back to the shop, they will be there. Just today, I decided I fancied making a meatloaf. So I went to my supermarket to buy some eggs that you use for binding the mixture. And would you believe it? They didn't have any. Well, that's not entirely true. They had the expensive free range eggs, which hardly anybody buys. But the pack of 15 eggs that cost you that cost you £2, which everybody buys and everybody uses, sold out. Butter. Standard supermarket own brand salted butter, often out of stock. Milk. Good northerner that I am, I drink sterilised milk. They call it UHT milk these days, but it's steri milk. Often sold out. Now, if the supermarkets cannot maintain supplies, then this is very worrying for the future of the country if we can't organise basic things in a supposedly first world country. It's the sort of thing you expect in a third world country where somebody forgot to sign the chitty, so the truck does not deliver. But that's not the case here. Everything is supposed to run on a just in time system where the computer tells the supply depot that a supermarket is running out of eggs, and then they get put on the truck the next day. So the supplies are maintained. That's not happening, with the result that we are undergoing shortages. Nobody's going hungry. You can find what you want, probably at a higher price. Other supermarkets will have what you need, but that means you've got to go trekking around. It's not just supermarkets. My local petrol station a few weeks ago had sold out of diesel fuel. I don't put diesel fuel in my car, it's a petrol car. But what the problem with diesel today is going to be a problem with petrol tomorrow. Some idiot has not ordered the supplies, or the computer has not ordered the supplies to be delivered. And the managers of these places, be they supermarkets or petrol stations have so little autonomy that they can't pick up a phone and speak to the supply depot themselves. They have to sit there like puddings, waiting for the supplies to arrive and face the outrage of the punters. If it was just distribution, I could sort of understand it. Run by computers, managed by idiots. It's more to it than that. Do you remember the summer of 2012 when the NatWest banking system went completely offline? It was actually quite funny. I went along to my local branch of NatWest because that's where I banked. And I met an old lady who'd been retired but had returned to work because she was the only one who knew how to do things that were then done by computer, but she knew how to do them using pencil and paper and a slide rule. So they brought her back to work. I doubt if that could happen today, partly because she's going to be over 10 years older, but mainly because the branches are all closed. So when the system that governs our lives, that allows us to pay bills, that allows us to transfer money from one account to another, when that system stops working, which it does very often, then we've got problems. Problems came along in July of this year, 2024, when half the airlines in the world stopped operating because the computer program that set all the flight plans was down. It was down because some idiot did an upgrade and they messed it up. In the old days, flight plans were set by men with pencils and paper, and they could do it all by hand. Those skills are not there anymore. So, what are you going to do? Here's what I do. First of all, I make damn sure that I have cash in the house. The computer may go down, but there will be somebody who's taking cash and you can buy your milk off him. Probably going to be a supermarket. Supermarkets will continue to take cash even when the computer system is down. But nevertheless, I guarantee the corner shop will take cash. So make sure you have a float in the house. I'd never let my car get below 3/4 full in the tank. When it gets down to 3/4, I top the tank up. Occasionally, if I have a long journey to make, I will run the tank right down just to get the old fuel out, fill it up. When I get back to Edinburgh, before I go to the house, I go to a petrol station and I top up the tank. So I'm back to a full tank of fuel. I don't feel comfortable unless I've got at least 3/4 of a tank. I remember a friend of mine drove down to Oaxaca in southern Mexico, and the fuel distribution had not arrived. And he was stuck there for 2 weeks waiting for petrol supplies to arrive. And of course, nobody knew anything, nobody cared. He was sleeping in his van. I also remember driving through northern Mexico, heading towards the border with the United States, and not a single petrol station in the area where I was in at the time had fuel. What they said was that the first fuel was across the border in the USA. Now, obviously, men arrived in pickup trucks with fuel in 5-gallon containers, which they were selling at 3 times normal price. that's not quite the point, is it? So keep your car topped up. Keep a supply of good Bank of England pound fivers and tenors and 20s in the house. I'm not suggesting you keep thousands of pounds, but certainly I think you need a float of 200 or 300 in the house. And finally, the old story that you've heard before, keep a well-stocked pantry. I'm not talking about perishable goods. I'm talking about the pasta, the sugar, the tea, the coffee, the tins of meat, the tins of mixed vegetables, things that will last for years. Oh, and use them. Don't hide them away. Use them. And as the stock runs down, get new supplies in. We're not going to have the end of the world as we know it. What we are going to have, I'm convinced, is a Britain that just doesn't work very well, where nobody really cares that it doesn't work very well, and where there are enormous shortages. Nobody's going to die of starvation. Nobody's going to freeze to death. It will just be a bit sad and, yes, a bit pathetic compared to the life that we used to live until the end of the 20th century. If you follow my advice, if you do as I do, keep your float of cash, keep your car topped up with petrol, make sure you've got a well-stocked pantry. That I'm not suggesting that everything is going to be rosy, but I am saying that you'll get by. And at the end of the day, given the state of this country, any man who can say that he's getting by is actually doing rather well. Look after yourselves now.